Picture a building that looks, from the outside, like someone's very wealthy grandmother's country house. Cream-coloured stone, tall windows, iron gates painted black and recently oiled so they don't squeak when they open. A garden with gravel paths and clipped hedges and roses that someone tends carefully every morning before the patients wake up. Now add bars on the inside of those windows, bars you can't see from the street. Add a room in the basement with a copper tub bolted to the floor and a pipe that delivers water cold enough to stop your heart, which is exactly the point therapeutically speaking. Add a ledger on the director's desk that lists each patient not by name but by number, and next to each number, the monthly fee being paid by the family that put them there. Add a dining room where 40 women eat in silence with a uniformed attendant standing at each end of the table, watching. Not because anyone is violent, just because watching is the point. That's a maison de santé, a house of health. That's what they called them in 19th-century France. Charming name, isn't it? Private asylums for the wealthy and the almost wealthy. Establishments that promised fresh air and expert medical care and the gentle restoration of reason to minds temporarily overwhelmed by the pressures of modern life. A place where you could arrive in a hired carriage from Paris in the morning and by evening be locked in a room that isn't yours, wearing clothes that aren't yours, with no legal right to leave. That second part they didn't put in the brochure. We're going back there tonight. Not as visitors peer in through gates, not as historians taking notes. We're living it. One day, one person. Everything they would have smelled, heard, feared, and survived. I make these history stories and honestly I have no idea if any of you actually sleep to them, or if you're all just extremely specific people who like hearing about rooms with bolted copper bathtubs and the particular silence of places where screaming has been happening for so long that the walls have absorbed it. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Get comfortable. We're going somewhere cold tonight. Here we go. Your eyes open to a ceiling you don't recognize. That's the first thing. Before the smell, before the sound, before the full weight of where you're settles onto your chest like something physical. There's just the ceiling. White plaster, slightly yellowed. A water stain in the shape of something that might be a horse, or might be France itself, you can't tell. And you stare at it for what feels like a very long time before you remember. Then you remember. This smell arrives at almost the same moment. Camphor, that's the top note. Sharp and medicinal. The smell of effort, of someone trying very hard to convince you that this place is clean. Under it, something sweeter and more difficult to identify. A chemical sweetness, like overripe fruit, like laudanum, which you'll later learn is correct. It is laudanum. They add it to the linen when they wash it, a precaution against agitation during the night. Under that, stone, cold, wet stone, the kind that never fully dries, the kind that retains the chill of February even in May. The walls here are old. The building was something else before it was this. A country house, a convent, you'll never be entirely sure which. And the stone remembers what it used to be. It hasn't decided to accept its current purpose. Under everything, so deep you almost miss it. The smell of many bodies in a confined space, not unwashed exactly. Someone scrubs these floors, someone airs these rooms. But 40 women sleep here? Or 50? The number varies, and no amount of carbolic acid and lavender water can entirely erase the fact of human habitation at close quarters. And then, because your mind is finally waking up fully, because the last hour's worth of merciful half-sleep has burned away, and reality is reasserting itself with the particular brutality it reserves for mornings in places like this. You feel the bed, narrow, hard. The mattress is stuffed with something that isn't feathers, isn't even good wool, is probably husks of some kind, and every time you shift your weight, it makes a dry whispering sound against the metal frame. The blanket is coarse linen, undyed, worn soft from 100 washings, and it smells. Of course it does. Of camphor. Welcome to the Maison de Santé Vauclair, located 11 kilometres outside Paris on the road toward Versailles in the year of our Lord 1863. Your name is Marguerite. Marguerite Beaumont, née Clermont. You are 26 years old. You've been here for 9 days. Here is what they told you when they brought you here. That you had been suffering. That the physician had examined you and found your nerves in a state of extreme agitation. That rest was required. That the countryside and the expert care of Dr. Edouard Vauclair and his staff would restore you to yourself, to the cheerful and obedient woman your husband had married 4 years ago. That last part, your husband actually said that. Cheerful and obedient. The woman he had married. You remember the carriage ride. You remember the gates. You remember a young woman in a grey uniform who took your travelling bag and said, in a perfectly pleasant voice, that she would bring it to your room and then never returned it. That bag contained your letters, your journal, a miniature portrait of your mother that she had given you when you married, and your money. You remember asking politely to speak with Dr. Vauclair about the misunderstanding. You remember being led to a room with a lock on the outside of the door. You remember the lock being turned. That was 9 days ago. In those 9 days you've learned several things. You've learned that the word misunderstanding has no currency in this place. You have learned that the physician who examined you, a small, neat man named Dr. Renard, who smelled of tobacco, and spoke to your husband and not to you during the entire examination, had certified you as suffering from hysteria with manic episodes and nervous agitation requiring supervised rest. You have learned that under the laws of France in 1863, a married woman certified by 2 physicians as mentally ill can be committed to a maison de santé by her husband with no further legal process required. No hearing, no appeal. No one who needs to be convinced except the 2 doctors, and doctors are professional men who are by definition more credible than the wife of the man paying their fees. You have learned that a letter you wrote to your mother on your 3rd day here, a careful letter, measured in tone, asking for her intervention, was read by an attendant before it was sealed and never sent. You have learned that the roses in the garden are very beautiful, and that you are allowed to walk among them for 1 hour each afternoon, weather permitting, accompanied by an attendant who walks 3 steps behind you at all times. You have learned that the woman in the room next to yours, you can hear her through the wall, a low continuous humming that starts at around 4 in the morning and doesn't stop until she's given her morning dose of something, has been here for 11 years. 11 years. You lie on your husk-stuffed mattress and stare at the horse-shaped water stain on the ceiling, and you think, I am not going to be here for 11 years. But thinking a thing and knowing how to prevent it are different problems entirely. The bell rings. The bell is cast iron, mounted in the corridor rung by Sœur Angélique, who is not actually a nun. The establishment keeps the title as a courtesy. It sounds better in the brochure. At exactly 6 o'clock every morning. You've memorized the sound. You have memorized everything here because this is what you do when you're intelligent and frightened and have very little else to do with your mind. The bell sounds twice, a pause, then twice more. The pause is exactly 3 seconds long. You've counted. You sit up. The floor is cold under your feet. Cold in a way that travels immediately through the thin cotton of your stockings. They let you keep your stockings. The personal clothing policy here is complex and arbitrary. Some women have their own dresses. Others wear the grey uniform. The determination appears to be based on some combination of how much their family is paying and how difficult they were during the first week, and wraps around your ankles like something claiming you. You stand. The room is perhaps 4 meters by 3. You know this because you have walked it many times, pressing your feet carefully heel to toe like you're measuring something, which you are. There is a bed, a small table, a chair, a washstand with a ceramic basin, and a ceramic jug that is refilled each morning with water that is cold and slightly cloudy. There is a window. The window faces the garden. The window has 2 vertical iron bars set into the frame, painted white to be less obvious. Painted so many times the paint has built up into thick, lumpy ridges you can feel under your fingers when you touch them. You touch them every morning. Not checking, just acknowledging. The basin water is cold enough that washing your face makes you gasp. You do it anyway, methodically. Face, hands up to the wrists, back of the neck. You've read somewhere, you read a great deal before, that cleanliness is a form of dignity that no one can take from you as long as you insist on it. You can't remember who wrote that. Someone practical. Someone who'd been in difficult situations. You dry your face on the towel hanging from the ring by the washstand. The towel is stiff. Everything here is slightly stiff, like it's been starched with something other than starch, like the institution has its own particular texture, and it's transferred to every fabric it touches. You dress quickly, your own dress. Grey wool, the good one. Your mother had it made 2 years ago. Because you were one of the ones who arrived during visiting hours on a Sunday when the director was present, and there was a question of first impressions, and so they let you keep your clothes. For now. You've noticed that Madame Dufour down the corridor arrived 8 weeks ago in a silk dress with jet buttons and now wears the grey uniform. The silk dress is presumably in a storeroom somewhere. Presumably, you do your hair without a mirror. They took the mirror. Not from cruelty, or not only from cruelty. The official reason is that mirrors can constitute a danger to agitated patients, which may be true, but the effect, regardless of the reason, is that you must now reconstruct your own face from memory every morning as you pin your hair, trusting the familiarity of your own hands to manage without reflection. You twist your hair up, pin it, and the knock comes at the door. The courtesy knock, one firm strike, no pause for an answer, and the door opens and Sœur Angélique says, without looking at you, "Breakfast in 5 minutes." Breakfast is taken in the dining room on the ground floor, which was once clearly a drawing room of some elegance. The ceiling has ornamental plasterwork. The fireplace has a marble surround. The walls still show the ghost rectangles where paintings used to hang before they were replaced with nothing. There are 3 tables. The women are sorted by something, not entirely clear to you what, possibly severity of diagnosis, possibly cost of care, possibly some combination the administration has never articulated to anyone. And you sit at the middle table with 9 other women, some of whom have been here long enough that they've stopped registering the dining room as a room with other people in it. The woman across from you is named Hélène. You know this because she told you on your third morning, leaning across the table during the brief window when the attendant had stepped to the door, speaking quickly in a voice just above a whisper. Hélène Marchand, 41, schoolteacher from Rouen. I am perfectly sane. Don't believe anything they tell you about me. You believed her immediately, which may say something about your own state of mind, or may simply say something about Hélène, who has clear eyes and a steady manner and a way of holding a spoon that suggests she was never going to drop it. This morning she's already seated when you arrive, eyes down, bread in hand. The bread is white, slightly stale, with a crust that resists tearing rather than breaking cleanly. There's a cup of café au lait, mostly au lait, very little café but hot. There is a thin smear of butter on a ceramic plate that everyone shares. There is nothing else. You eat. The sound of breakfast at the Maison Vauclair is the sound of approximately 30 women eating in a space designed for sound to carry. Enforced silence meeting the physical reality of 30 people chewing bread and occasionally setting down ceramic cups on marble tabletops. Every small sound arrives with great clarity. The scrape of a chair, the particular swallow of someone drinking too fast. The silence is not natural. It's not the silence of the monastery, which has peace somewhere inside it. This is the silence of a rule, observed only because the cost of breaking it is not worth calculating before you've had your café au lait. The attendants stand at the doors, 2 of them. Sœur Angélique has gone somewhere. The 2 on breakfast duty are young women from the nearby villages, hired because they're strong and not imaginative and need the income. You've watched them carefully. They do their jobs. They don't hate anyone. They don't love anyone. They stand at the doors and watch the room with the alert but unfocused attention of people performing a function they've done so many times it no longer requires thought. Hélène looks up. Her eyes meet yours. She makes a very small movement with her lips. Not a smile, something smaller, just an acknowledgement. You are here. I am here. We are both still here. You look down at your bread. You need to understand what this place is before we go any further, because asylum and a madhouse and lunatic hospital, these are all words that suggest the same thing, and they're not the same thing, and the differences matter enormously if you happen to be living inside them. The large public institutions, the Salpêtrière in Paris, the Bicêtre, are state facilities, enormous, thousands of patients, underfunded, overcrowded, a mixture of the genuinely ill and the elderly and the criminal and the poor and the simply inconvenient. They're a different kind of horror. We're not going there tonight. The Maison Vauclair is what they call a maison de santé privée, a private house of health. It's a medical business. Dr. Edouard Vauclair inherited it from his father, who established it in 1831 after the passage of the Law of Alienation, which first regulated private madhouses in France and, in doing so, made them official. Before 1831, private asylums existed without any legal framework whatsoever. After 1831, they still existed largely without meaningful oversight, but now there was paperwork. The maison accepts between 40 and 60 patients at any given time. The rates range from 12 francs per month for a basic room in the East Wing, the rooms without gardens views, slightly smaller, the wallpaper peeling at the corners, to 60 francs per month for the private pavilion in the garden, which has its own small salon and access to the terrace and a view of the Seine Valley in the distance if you stand at exactly the right angle. 60 francs a month. That's approximately what a schoolteacher earns. A schoolteacher like Hélène. Hélène is in the East Wing. You're at 35 francs, which puts you in the middle building with the white-painted iron bars and the husk mattress, but at least you can see the garden. The medical staff consists of Dr. Vauclair, who does rounds 3 times per week, a younger physician named Dr. Moreau, who does daily rounds and is responsible for most of the actual treatment decisions, 3 certificated attendants, and a small army of local women who do the cleaning and the laundry and the food preparation, and who are technically outside the medical hierarchy, but who constitute in practice the entire functioning texture of daily life. Treatment at the Maison Vauclair in 1863 is based on the theory of moral therapy, which is actually a relatively humane development in the history of psychiatry, which is not a sentence you would expect to hear about a place with copper bathtubs bolted to the floor. Moral therapy means patients are treated as human beings capable of reason. They're given structure, activity, gardens, fresh air. The assumption is that the disordered mind can be restored to order through the application of calm, order, and routine. The theory is real and genuine and represented genuine progress over what came before, which involved chains. The practice, in a facility that needs to balance therapeutic ideals against the economic reality of keeping 40 women docile enough not to disturb the paying patients in the private pavilions, involves a great deal of creative interpretation. After breakfast, there is what Dr. Moreau's notes call morning activity. What morning activity actually means depends on the day of the week and on which wing you're assigned to. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, morning activity means weaving. There is a room off the main corridor, originally the music room. You can see the outline of the pianino that used to stand in the corner, a faint impression in the carpet, that has been fitted with 4 large hand looms. Women sit at the looms and weave ribbon, plain woven ribbon in cream and grey, sold to a fabric merchant in Versailles for a price that is, presumably, not split with the weavers. On Monday, Wednesday and Friday, morning activity means needlework in the salon, which is the most public room in the building, the one that faces the road, the one with windows clear enough to be seen from outside. Visitors occasionally walk past the gates on Sunday afternoons and see the patients at their needlework through the clean glass and think, how peaceful, how orderly, how exactly like a convent. On Saturdays, morning activity is what Dr. Moreau calls restorative ambulation, which is walking around the garden in lines. Today is Wednesday, needlework day. You take your seat at one of the small tables. The room smells of beeswax. They keep it polished, this room, the showroom, and of the particular dusty sweetness of cotton thread in many colours. There are baskets of thread on each table. There are embroidery frames. There are pattern pinned to a board on the wall. Flowers, stems, leaves, all very conventional, all very transferable to pillowcases and dresser scarves, and the other domestic objects that occupy the comfortable hours of women with comfortable lives. You pick up a needle, you thread it. This you can do without thinking. You learn to embroider at your mother's knee. Your hands know how to make a satin stitch and a French knot and a feather stitch without your mind needing to supervise, which is, you have discovered, both a comfort and a danger. When your hands work without supervision, your mind is free to think, and thinking here is both essential and risky. The attendant on needlework duty is a girl named Victoire, who cannot be more than 20 years old, and who has a habit of sitting in the chair by the window and immediately closing her eyes for something that isn't quite sleep. more of a practiced semi-consciousness that responds to sound while technically maintaining the appearance of supervision. You watch her settle into the chair. You watch her eyelids drop. You make 2 stitches and lean very slightly toward Elaine, who is seated at the table beside yours. They moved Madame Arnoux last night, you say, barely audible. The level of sound you've learned in 9 days, the level that travels 2 feet and no further. Helene's needle continues its movement. In, out, in, out. She doesn't look up. Where? The lower floor, I think. I heard the keys at around midnight. 2 sets of footsteps going down. Helene makes a small sound that isn't quite acknowledgement, isn't quite dismissal. The water room, she says, even more quietly. They use it for the difficult ones. Madame Arnoux was shouting again yesterday after supper. The water room. You've heard the term 3 times since you arrived. You haven't been there. You haven't asked directly. Asking directly about things you're not supposed to know is the most efficient way to make the staff notice you. And being noticed by the staff in this place is something you're working very hard to avoid. But Helene has been here 5 months. Helene knows things. What happens in the water room? Another silence. Several stitches. Victoire shifts in her chair by the window, not quite waking, adjusting some internal balance of semi-consciousness. They fill the copper bath with cold water, Helene says. They put you in it. They hold you in it. A pause. How cold? Cold enough that you stop fighting it. Cold enough that when they finally take you out and wrap you in blankets and put you back in your room, you sleep for 14 hours without any additional medication required. She says it with perfect flatness. No drama. The voice of someone describing a technique, not a cruelty. Which is, you realise how it's framed in Dr. Vauclair's literature on the subject. Hydrotherapy. Recommended by the most progressive alienists in France and Germany. Published findings. Peer-reviewed by the standards of 1863. Has it been done to you, you ask? Another long pause. In, out. The needle. Once. My 4th week here. I wrote a letter to the examining magistrate at Rouen describing the conditions of my confinement and requesting a formal review of my certification. What happened to the letter? Same thing that happens to all the letters. She glances up for one moment. Just one moment. Her eyes meeting yours with an expression of such precise, concentrated information, and then looks back down at her work. They read it, you say. They always read. Them. The needle in your hand has stopped moving. You make yourself continue. In, out. A petal forming under your fingers, each stitch a millimetre of flower that will eventually be cut from the frame and used for something domestic and pleasant in some home you will never see. Then I went to the water room, Helene says, and when I came back I stopped writing to magistrates. She says this with no particular bitterness, just information, just the adjustment she made, the calibration to reality. The same calibration that everyone in this place has made at some point. The adjustment from thinking you can get out to thinking about how to survive while you're in. You look at your embroidery, a flower, very pretty, destined for someone's sitting room. You think, I am not going to make that adjustment. But you also think, I am not going to the water room, which means you need to be smarter. Let me tell you something about the law of alienation of 1838, because it matters more than any individual doctor, or any individual treatment, or any individual cold bath. It matters because it's the machine that makes all of this possible. Before 1838, The situation with private madhouses in France was, if anything, even more chaotic. Men of wealth or influence could commit inconvenient people to institutions of varying quality with almost no regulation. After the Revolution, after Napoleon, after the Restoration, France was rebuilding its legal infrastructure, and in 1838 the law arrived that was supposed to fix this. In some ways it did. The law required that patients be examined by a physician before commitment. It required that the institution maintain records. It required that the departmental prefect be notified of each admission. It created a system of inspectors who would visit institutions periodically to review conditions. Revolutionary progress. Here is what it didn't do. A married woman in France in 1863 is not a legally autonomous person. She cannot open a bank account without her husband's permission. She cannot make a contract. She cannot appear in court without her husband as her legal representative. She cannot technically certify herself as sane. Her own testimony about her own mental state is legally interesting but not conclusive, because she is, by law, under her husband's protection, and her husband has already indicated his view of her mental state by having her committed. The physicians who certify commitment are paid, directly or indirectly, by the families requesting commitment. Not always through corruption, often through the simple fact that the family is paying for the institution, and the institution employs the physicians, and the physicians understand whose interests maintain their employment. The inspector who reviews conditions at private maisons de santé visits twice a year. His inspection lasts on average 4 hours. He reviews the ledgers. He walks through the public rooms. He speaks to Dr. Vauclair over a glass of excellent Burgundy in the director's office, with its panelled walls and good carpet, and the window that looks out over the rose garden where the patients walk in orderly lines. He does not speak to the patients, not in any meaningful way. He might nod to a woman he passes in the corridor. He might, if she addresses him directly, respond with the particular gentle brevity reserved for the mentally ill and the very young. A kindness of tone that contains, underneath its kindness, the assumption that nothing she says can be entirely reliable. She is, after all, a patient in a maison de santé. There is paperwork confirming her condition. This is what Hélène meant when she said they always read the letters. It's not that there's no one to write to. It's that writing to them is like speaking into a room where everyone is slightly deaf, specifically deaf to your frequency. You have 9 days of lived research on this question. You've been thinking about it almost continuously since you arrived. What you need is not a letter to a magistrate. What you need is a person who has no financial relationship with the institution and no professional stake in believing the physicians over the patients, who is present inside these walls long enough to see something meaningful, and who has enough standing to make a credible formal complaint. What you need is, essentially, a miracle, or a journalist. You make another stitch. The flower is taking shape. Very pretty. The morning passes in the particular slow way of all mornings here, which is to say that time moves differently inside the walls of the Maison Vauclair than it does outside them. You noticed this in the first few days before you understood what was happening. The days feel simultaneously very long and very featureless, like a road across flat country where the distance to the horizon never seems to change. This is, you have come to understand, not an accident. The schedule is designed to create exactly this effect. Activity follows activity in a rhythm sufficiently regular that the days blur together. Breakfast at 6:30, morning activity until 10, then the reading room. There are a shelf of approved books, mostly improving literature and religious texts. The novels have been culled apparently on the grounds that fiction overstimulates the nervous system. Then the midday meal at 12. Then the afternoon walk, 1 hour, weather permitting. Then needlework or weaving again. Then supper at 6. Then the rooms locked at 8. No variety, no surprises, no stimulation of any kind that hasn't been approved by Dr. Moreau and logged in his casebook. The theory is monotony is calming. Routine suppresses the nervous agitation that leads to episodes. The practice is monotony is how you dissolve a person, not cruelly, not deliberately. The dissolution is a side effect perhaps of the therapy, but it's real. You've watched it in the women who've been here for months and years. They stop asking questions. They stop initiating conversation. Their faces take on a smooth and slightly distant quality, like something waiting to be used, available but not present. Like Madame Fournier at the table in the corner, who has been here for 7 years, who arrived apparently in a state of violent agitation, and is now so perfectly calm that she sits for hours without speaking, without moving, without doing anything that could be described as either well or unwell, just existing inside the routine like a mechanism that's learned the pattern and runs it without engagement. The monotony is, you think, more dangerous than the water room. You can survive the water room once. You don't know if you can survive 7 years of sameness. At 10 o'clock, the reading room. The reading room was probably a library once. The shelves are the right size and the right shape, and they're built into the wall with that particular solidity of furniture made to stay in one place for generations. What sits on them now is not what the house's original owners would have put there. You've catalogued the available reading material over 9 days. 22 volumes of religious literature, mostly Catholic devotional texts, a few Protestant ones, some Jansenist tracts that have been on these shelves long enough that they predate the current establishment. 14 volumes of improving literature, biographies of great men and women, histories of France's glorious past, natural history of the kind that presents the world as evidence of God's orderly design, 6 volumes of medical literature, actual medical literature, technical texts on nervous diseases and alienism and the physiology of the brain, which were presumably shelved here accidentally or by oversight, and which you have been reading with intense, focused attention for the past 6 days. These 6 volumes are the most useful thing in the Maison Vauclair, because the medical literature tells you exactly what Dr. Moreau believes about you, and knowing what someone believes about you is the beginning of knowing how to change their mind. You take the volume you were reading yesterday. It's a treatise by Dr. Jean-Pierre Falret on moral insanity and its treatment, published in 1854, and find your page. Falret is interesting. He's one of the reformers, one of the genuinely humane practitioners who believes that the lunatic is a sick person and not a criminal, who believes that moral treatment and fresh air and structured activity represent genuine progress over the old methods. He also believes, without any apparent awareness of the problem this creates, that the certification of a patient as needing treatment is itself sufficient evidence that treatment is needed. He has constructed essentially a closed loop. The patient is here because the physician said they need to be here, and the physician's judgment is reliable because they are a physician. Falret doesn't worry about the woman whose husband wanted to. Romarian knew two physicians personally. Falret doesn't worry about Hélène, who wrote a letter to a magistrate and ended up in a cold bath. Falret is working on theories, you're working on survival. You read. The reading room attendant today is a woman named Marie Claire, who knits while she supervises, her needles clicking in a rhythm that underscores the silence rather than breaking it. Across from you, a young woman named Sophie Letang, 19 years old, admitted 3 weeks before you. Her mother arranged the commitment, reasons unclear to you though. Sophie cries silently every Wednesday morning with the specific regularity of someone who has found a schedule for grief. Reads something devotional with her lips moving slightly. The morning light comes through the windows in long panels. Dust moves in it, slow, unhurried. Outside, somewhere in the distance, you can hear a cart on the road. Normal life, continuing without you. You read about the symptoms of hysteria. You read about the recommended duration of treatment. You read about the conditions under which a patient might be discharged as recovered. Recovered. There's the word. Dr. Moreau does his rounds on Wednesdays after the midday meal. You knew this was coming. You prepared for it the way you'd prepare for any important meeting. Mentally, carefully, going over what you know about the person you're meeting, what they want from the encounter, what you need from it. Dr. Armand Moreau is 29 years old. You know this because his medical degree, framed and hung in the consultation room, bears the date of 1857, and physicians in France don't typically graduate before 23. He has dark hair, slightly too long, that he pushes back from his forehead when he's thinking. He wears a good suit, but the cuffs are beginning to fray. Not a man with family money then, working his way through a career that will hopefully improve. He carries a casebook, black leather, which he writes in very fast with a pen that scratches the page audibly. He has been kind to you, in his way. Not the way you want, not the way of someone who actually listens to what you're telling him. The way of someone who believes he is being kind, which is a fundamentally different thing, and which can, you've decided, be worked with. You're in the garden when he comes to find you. The midday meal was soup, thin, vegetable. The broth made from what appears to be the water the vegetables were washed in plus optimism, and bread. And then the afternoon hour before rounds when patients are permitted to sit in the garden or the reading room according to preference. You always choose the garden. This is deliberate. The garden is evidence of something, of orderliness, of improvement, of a patient in a calm and rational state. You walk the gravel paths. You stop to look at the roses. You look like recovery. Madame Beaumont. Dr. Moreau approaches from the terrace door, casebook under his arm. His cuffs today. Worse than yesterday, actually. Something has frayed further. Dr. Moreau. You turn to face him with an expression you've been practicing. Not too bright. Brightness can read as mania. Not too flat. Flatness reads as deeper withdrawal. You're aiming for something calm and grounded. A woman at rest. He opens his casebook. How did you sleep? Reasonably well, thank you. I was awake for perhaps an hour in the night, but I believe that's improving. He makes a note. Any distressing thoughts? Any urges toward agitation? Agitation. That's the word they use for everything from crying to shouting to, presumably, writing letters to magistrates. Agitation is the diagnosis of anything that departs from perfect docility. No, you say. I've been reading this morning. Dr. Falret's work on moral treatment. I found it very interesting. He looks up from the casebook. A small flicker of something in his expression. Surprise, possibly, or a recalibration of what he expected from this conversation. You've been reading Falret. He's on the shelf in the reading room. I hope it's not inappropriate. It seemed like it might help me to understand my own condition better. You say, my own condition, as if it's a real thing. As if you're someone who accepts the premise of their diagnosis and is working thoughtfully within it. You've thought about this phrase for 4 days. It's the exact phrase Falret uses in his own text when he describes the ideal patient. Attitude. You are quoting Falret's ideal patient back at a physician who trained on Falret. This is either very clever or too clever. You won't know which until he responds. He's quiet for a moment, looking at you with an attention that's more genuine than his usual rounds manner. And what have you concluded, he says, not unkindly. That the benefit of this approach, you say carefully, depends a great deal on the patient's own engagement with the process of recovery. That rest and routine are necessary conditions, but not sufficient ones. That the patient must also be working actively toward restoration, which I intend to be. Another note in the casebook. That's a very clear-minded observation, he says. I am a clear-minded person, you say. Gently, not arguing, just information. The garden is quiet around you. A bee moves along the rose hedge. The sound of keys somewhere in the building. The everyday sound of this place. The percussion of locks and latches. The constant auditory reminder of what the roses are decorating. Your husband believes, Dr. Moreau begins, and then stops, reorganizes. My husband, you say, even more gently, believed that my interest in my own circumstances, practical circumstances, financial, legal, represented a disorder of the nerves. I wonder if what appeared to him as agitation might be better understood as, you pause, seeming to search for the word, temperament, not disease. The words are Falret's too, in a sense. He distinguishes between temperament and true alienation. He's careful about it, more careful than most of his contemporaries. You are having this conversation in a rose garden with a young physician who is realizing, possibly for the first time, that the woman in front of him is not what her admission papers describe. He makes a longer note than usual. I think, he says finally, that we should schedule a full consultation. Not rounds, a proper consultation in my office, where we can discuss your case in more depth. I would welcome that, you say. He closes the casebook. The bee is still moving along the roses, unhurried, doing bee work in the afternoon light. Next Tuesday, he says. Thank you, doctor. He goes back through the terrace door. You stand for a moment in the garden, watching a cloud cross the sun, feeling the temperature drop by 2 degrees as the shadow passes. One small crack in the wall. That's all you've made today. It's still more than yesterday. Supper that evening is roast chicken, 1 leg between 2 women, beans, more bread. The chicken is better than the soup. The chicken is actually genuinely good. The kitchen here employs a woman from a nearby farm who clearly knows what she's doing, and on the days she's working, the food reflects this. You've eaten worse in your actual life. The woman beside you at supper is not Helene. The table assignments shift for supper, another small disruption of the pattern, another way of preventing the formation of alliances, and is instead a woman of perhaps 50, very thin, who eats with great deliberateness, as if each bite requires a decision. She hasn't spoken to you in 9 days. She doesn't speak to anyone as far as you can tell. She eats, she walks the garden, She does needlework with a precision that would be remarkable in any context. Her name, according to Hélène, is Madame Beauvais. She was a painter, apparently. Watercolours. Her husband found her paintings disturbing. This was 1857. She's been here since 1857. 6 years. She lifts a piece of bread to her mouth, eats it, sets her hands in her lap. You watch her and think. She was 44 when she arrived. She is 50 now. She will be 60 here and 70, or she will die here. And either way, 6 years of her life have already been fed into this machine and processed into docility and routine and one leg between two women on chicken nights. The painter's hands are very still in her lap. You think about the paintings her husband found disturbing. You think about what kind of person leaves that. After supper, before the 8 o'clock lock, there is what the administration calls free time. 30 minutes. The salon is open. The garden is still accessible while the light holds. This is when the social life of the institution exists, if it can be said to exist at all. Small groups form. Women who've known each other long enough to trust each other slightly, or who share a corridor, or who've simply been seated near each other often enough that proximity has become a kind of acquaintance. You find Hélène in the garden, on the bench near the wall that faces west. The evening light is long and golden on the gravel, the shadows of the garden wall stretching across the paths. Somewhere over that wall, somewhere in the direction of Paris, the sun is setting over a city where people are finishing their dinners and going to cafes and reading newspapers and making the 10,000 small choices that constitute ordinary life. You can't see Paris from here. The wall is too high. But you know it's there. 11 kilometres. Close enough to feel if you stand at exactly the right point. Moreau asked for a proper consultation, you say, settling onto the bench. Next Tuesday. Hélène is quiet for a moment. She turns something over in her hands. A pebble, smooth. Something she picked up from the gravel path. Something to hold. What did you say to him? I quoted Falray at him. The distinction between temperament and alienation. You've read it too. Everyone on the shelf has read everything on the shelf, Hélène says. That's what happens when the only books available are interesting ones. The devotional literature is untouched. You almost smile. For the first time in 9 days, something close to a genuine smile. He was surprised, you say. He expected something from me and I wasn't it. That's useful. She rolls the pebble between her fingers. But don't move too fast. The last woman who made progress with Moreau got through to him. I mean, not just maintained good behaviour, moved too fast. Started asking directly about the timeline for discharge. Started asking for letters to be sent. He retreated. Put a note in her casebook about premature restoration expectations indicative of incomplete treatment. You absorb this. So the approach is patient, gradual, consistent. The approach, Hélène says, is to make him believe, genuinely believe, not just note it in the casebook believe, that you are the rational person you actually are, which takes time, because his training requires him to mistrust his patient's testimony about themselves, and untraining that is slow work. The golden light is fading. The bees have gone to wherever bees go at dusk. The first coolness of evening is moving through the garden. How long, you ask? Hélène is quiet for a moment. I don't know, she says finally. I've been here 5 months. I've been making the same approach, carefully, slowly. I believe Moreau is beginning to doubt my certification, but his employment depends on Vauclair and Vauclair's establishment depends on maintaining good relations with the families paying for commitments, and your family and mine want us to be here. My husband wants me to be here. Your husband? Yes. A pause. Is there anyone else? Anyone outside who's looking? You think about your mother. Your mother is in Lyon. Your mother has received no letter from you, and presumably has received one from your husband explaining that you are unwell and under the best possible care. Your mother is a practical woman who trusts physicians and trusts the law, and probably believes, with genuine grief, that her daughter's nervous condition has finally manifested into something requiring serious treatment. Your mother is not looking, because she doesn't know there's anything to look for. My brother might, you say. He never liked my husband, but I haven't been able to get a letter to him. What you need, Helene says, is someone who comes here, from outside, who can see you, who will go home and say to someone who matters, that woman is not ill. The bell rings from inside the building, 8 o'clock. The garden is ending. You stand up, brush the gravel dust from your dress. Does anyone come? You ask. Visitors, I mean. Anyone from outside. Helene stands too. She puts the smooth pebble in the pocket of her dress, an act so small and private that you feel privileged to witness it. Twice, she says, in 5 months. Visiting day is the first Sunday of the month. Families come who want to come, and twice a year there's an inspector, Dr. Boignet from the prefectural office. She pauses. But there was also, 2 months ago, a man who arrived at the gate on a Tuesday morning with a letter from the Academy of Medicine, requesting a clinical visit, a study. He was writing something, an article, I think, on the conditions in private maisons de santé. You feel something sharp under your sternum, not quite hope yet, the precursor to hope. What happened? Vauclair met him at the gate, spoke with him for 20 minutes, showed him the garden and the reading room and 3 patients who have been here long enough to know how to behave during inspections. Gave him coffee in the director's office. She pauses. He left 3 hours after he arrived. Did he speak to anyone? Any of us? Not with any real access. The attendants were present for every conversation. Another pause, longer. But he was in the reading room for approximately 15 minutes while Vauclair took a telephone call, and he left a card on the shelf next to the fallret. You stare at her. The card is still there, she says. The door of your room locks at 8. You lie on the husk mattress in your good grey wool dress. You sleep in your dress. There are nightgowns here, but they feel like surrender. And you think. The card. You didn't see it in your 6 days of reading the medical shelf, which means either Helene is mistaken, which seems unlikely, or it's been placed carefully between books, hidden in plain sight. You'll look tomorrow. The window above your bed shows a rectangle of dark blue sky, the first stars appearing, the black outline of the garden wall against the last of the light. Somewhere beyond that wall, 11 kilometres of road, Paris. Cafes, people finishing dinners, newspapers, the normal machinery of the world. You listen to the sounds of the building settling for the night, the footsteps of the night attendant making rounds in the corridor, regular, unhurried. Pause at each door. Just a pause, just the confirmation that nothing is wrong, that everything is quiet. And then on to the next. The low continuous hum from the room next to yours. Madame Anu is back from the water room, apparently. You'd worried yesterday when you heard her move down. The hum is the sound of a woman who has found an internal space where the institution can't entirely reach her. Not a pleasant sound, not a reassuring sound, but a sound of presence, of continued existence, which is something. From somewhere below, the creak of the building's old bones settling as the temperature drops, the pop of wood contracting, the specific sound of a place that has been a place for a long time, that has absorbed a great deal of human suffering and simply continued being a building, which is what buildings do. The stars are bright tonight. You can see 3 of them through your window, maybe 4. Hard to tell from the distance and your angle. You think about the card. You think about Dr. Moreau's fraying cuffs and his genuine surprise when you quoted Falret. You think about Hélène's 5 months, careful and slow, and the woman before her who moved too fast and got a note in her casebook. You think about Madame Beauvais' still hands in her lap, and the paintings her husband found disturbing, and 6 years. The night attendant's footsteps return, going the other way now. Pause at your door. You hear the small particular silence that means she's listening. You breathe normally, even, asleep sounding. The footsteps continue. You open your eyes to the dark. The stars through your window, 11 kilometers of road. I need to tell you something about how private asylums in France actually worked in 1863, and specifically how they worked as businesses, because this is the part that almost no one understands from the outside. The Maison Vauclair is not, despite appearances, primarily a medical institution. It is a hotel with medical services, and like any hotel, its fundamental relationship is with the people paying for rooms, not the people occupying them. Dr. Vauclair Père established the Maison in 1831 with a combination of genuine medical idealism and sharp commercial instinct. The law of alienation had created a licensed market for private mental health care. The urban middle and upper classes of France, a society under enormous social pressure, navigating rapid industrialization, class anxiety, the erosion of old certainties, were producing in increasing numbers people whom their families found inconvenient or incomprehensible or frightening. The Maison de Santé existed to accept those people and to manage the situation. Managing the situation meant different things for different families. For some, it genuinely meant medical treatment, nervous, breakdowns, melancholia, what today would probably be called severe depression or psychosis, conditions real and disabling that families wanted addressed and physicians genuinely tried to address. For others, it meant storage, comfortable, medicalized, officially therapeutic storage for a person the family found inconvenient. A wife who asked too many questions about money. An heir who preferred music to business. A daughter who refused a proposed marriage. A son who had announced his intention to become an artist. An elderly parent whose continued existence was financially complicated. The Maison did not officially distinguish between these cases. Every patient was admitted under a medical certification, and the medical certification said nervous disorder or hysteria or mania or melancholia, because these are broad categories, and physicians in 1863 are working with genuinely limited diagnostic tools, and the scientific understanding of mental illness is almost entirely wrong in ways that will take another 60 years to begin to correct. So the machine processes everyone the same way. The genuine cases and the fraudulent cases get the same routine, the same reads 3 books, the same husk mattresses and morning bells and afternoon walks in lines. The only way to get out is to be certified as recovered by a physician who is employed by a director who depends on relationships with families who wanted you in here. Unless you can find someone else, That's what the card is about. Thursday. Thursday is weaving day. You take your seat at the loom with the particular physical familiarity of someone who has been doing this for days now. The body knowing where to sit, where to place the feet, how to hold the shuttle, all of it automatic, all of it allowing the mind to work on something else. The reading room comes after weaving, an hour. You take the falrette from the shelf, open it to your page, you look at the volumes beside it. The card is between the falrette and a treatise by Esquirol on moral insanity, published in 1838. You almost miss it. It's tucked at an angle, the edge barely visible. You put falrette down, take Esquirol, open it. The card falls into your lap, very small, cream-coloured, slightly worn at the corners. Jules Renaud, journaliste, La Revue Médicale de France, 32 rue des Écoles, Paris, 5e. That's all. No personal message. Of course, any message would have identified it as what it is. You read the address 3 times. Commit it to memory with the focused attention of someone who knows they will not have access to this card a second time. 32 rue des Écoles, Paris. You put the card back between the pages of Esquirol. You open your falrette. You read about moral treatment with an expression of interested calm. The attendant's needles click. Dust moves in the morning light. Your heart is moving at a speed that you're working very hard not to let appear on your face. 32 rue des Écoles, the problem of the letter. You know from Hélène's experience and from the 9 days of observation that constitute your education here, that any letter you write and attempt to send through official channels will be read by an attendant before it leaves the building. The mail is collected from the administration office, where Madame Lecomte, the director's secretary, a woman of 50 with iron grey hair and the specific manner of someone who has chosen institutional loyalty over every other value, reviews outgoing correspondence daily. She doesn't, you think, read every word of every letter, but she reviews. She knows who is writing to whom and with what frequency. Anything going to a legal address or an official address or an address not on the approved family list will be noticed. What you need is either someone coming to visit, a visitor who could carry a message out physically, or a method of getting a letter past Madame Lecomte. Visiting day is the first Sunday of the month. It is currently Thursday. The first Sunday is in 12 days. The question is whether anyone is coming for you on the first Sunday. Your husband will not come. Your husband has placed you here precisely to remove you from his daily life, and a visit would complicate the emotional management of that decision. He will pay the 35 francs per month and have his secretary do the correspondence. Your mother might come, if she knows where you are, if she's been told something truthful about the situation, but your husband controls. What your mother is told, your brother, Pierre, younger than you by 4 years, currently working at a law firm in Bordeaux, from what you knew before you came here. Bordeaux is 8 hours by train, not impossible. But does Pierre know where you are? You lie on your mattress that night and try to construct what your husband has told people. He's a careful man. He would have told your mother that you were unwell and that he'd arranged for excellent care. He would have been vague about the specific location. Not lying exactly, just not being specific, which is its own kind of lie. Pierre would have been told the same thing. And Pierre, 4 years younger, junior at a law firm, not entirely in the habit of challenging his sister's much older and much more established husband. Pierre might have accepted this, or Pierre might have asked questions. You think about the last time you saw Pierre. 3 months ago, Christmas, at your mother's house in Lyon. You and your husband and Pierre and your mother, and the dinner that went exactly as dinners with your husband always went. His voice dominating the table, his opinions offered as facts, your silence noted and approved, Pierre watching you from across the table with an expression you couldn't quite read, then but now think might have been worry. Pierre was watching you. Maybe Pierre is worried. Maybe Pierre is looking. Friday, weaving. The shuttle moves back and forth and the ribbon grows by inches. Your hands move. Your mind works. You need to get a message to Pierre. You need him to come to visiting day. You need him to see you and know that what he's seeing is not a woman who needed to be committed. What you need, specifically, is for him to have your address. You review what you know. When you were admitted on the first day, you were given one piece of writing paper and one envelope. This is the official welcome communication, the family notification, the letter you write telling your family that you've arrived safely and that you're receiving excellent care. Dictated content, more or less, designed to reassure. You wrote a version of that letter to your mother. The letter that was never sent because you didn't write the reassurance, you wrote the truth. But here's something you've been thinking about since Wednesday. When the attendant reads outgoing correspondence, she's looking for letters that appear suspicious. Letters going to legal addresses. Letters with content that describes the institution unfavourably. Letters that read like appeals for help. She is not presumably looking for letters that appear to be exactly what they appear to be. A woman writing to her family. A woman writing to her family saying, I am at the Maison de Santé Vauclair on the road to Versailles, 11 kilometres outside Paris. I am receiving excellent care. I am thinking of you. Please come to visiting day on the first Sunday of the month. The address in that letter. That's the information that matters. That's what you need your brother to have. The content is reassuring, cooperative, a good patient, grateful for care, missing her family. Nothing that sounds like an alarm, but your brother will know. Pierre will read excellent care and hear the quotation marks around it. Pierre will read, please come to visiting day, and know that his sister, who has never once in her life asked anyone to please do anything for her, is asking for something specific and urgent. Pierre will come. Also, you have to believe. You asked Sir Angelique on Friday afternoon for a sheet of writing paper and an envelope. This is allowed. Personal correspondence is permitted. It's simply reviewed. She brings them to you after supper. You sit at the small table in your room, under the window with the last of the evening light, and you write the most carefully ordinary letter you have ever written in your life. Saturday. Restorative ambulation day. Walking around the garden in lines. You walk. 3 paces behind the woman in front of you. 3 paces ahead of the woman behind. The attendant at the front of the line. The attendant at the back. The garden is beautiful in the morning light. The roses are past their best now. The summer moving toward autumn. Some of the heads browning at the edges, the petals loosening. But the gravel is still raked and the hedges are still trimmed and there are still bees. Fewer now working the remaining flowers with something that looks like urgency. The bee version of the season-end push. You walk, gravel crunching under your shoes. The particular sound of orderly movement, 12 women on a path, the rhythm slightly ragged because the women have different natural walking speeds and are all adjusting to each other. Your letter is with Madame le Comte. You handed it to her this morning. She looked at it, looked at the address, Monsieur Pierre Clermont, 14 Rue de la Garonne, Bordeaux, and said nothing, made no visible judgment, set it in the outgoing tray. You don't know if she read it. You don't know if she'll send it. You walk. The wall at the end of the garden is 4 meters high. Old stone, slightly moss-covered at the base. At the top there are iron spikes set into the mortar. A recent addition, you'd guess. They look newer than the stone. They look like a decision made after something happened that someone wanted to prevent happening again. Above the wall, sky. Blue, high. The kind of autumn sky that goes up forever. 2 birds moving in it, very high, too far up to identify. Free as anything. You look at the sky until the line rounds the corner and the wall is behind you. Sunday. Visiting day is not today. The first Sunday is next week. But the regular Sunday routine is different from weekdays. Church attendance for those who request it. A longer period of free time. A slightly better midday meal. Real meat, a whole portion. The emotional temperature of the institution is different on Sundays. Harder to describe. The staff is slightly more distracted, slightly more human, slightly more conscious of having a life outside these walls that they'll be returning to this evening. The patients are simultaneously more hopeful. For those with families who visit, the anticipation of connection, and more desolate, because Sunday is the day the contrast between inside and outside is most visible. Through the window of the salon, which looks onto the road, you can see families on Sunday walks, mothers and fathers and children, well dressed in Sunday clothes, taking the air on a fine afternoon. They pass the gates of the maison sometimes. Occasionally someone glances in. They don't see anything alarming. They see a handsome house with a garden and iron gates, well-maintained, prosperous-looking. They see, if they look at the right moment, women walking paths among roses. They don't see the bars, not from outside. You sit in the salon with the other women, and you do needlework, and you watch the road, and you think about Pierre opening a letter in Bordeaux. Hélène is across from you. Her face today has something in it that it doesn't usually have. Something exhausted in a way that goes beyond tired. The specific exhaustion of hope deferred too many times. My husband was supposed to visit last month, she says quietly, not looking up from her embroidery. He didn't come. You don't say anything. He's been told that visits are not in my therapeutic interest at this stage. That stimulation from familiar relationships can impede the recovery process. She makes a stitch. That's in Falret too, actually. Not invented. Used legitimately in some cases. But not yours. My husband doesn't need an excuse. He needs to not think about this too hard. She makes another stitch. He was a good man when I married him. I don't think he's a bad man now. I think he had a wife who argued with the school board about the treatment of female teachers, and it frightened him. And when a physician suggested that her argumentativeness was a symptom of nervous disorder, he found that explanation genuinely easier to live with than the alternative. The alternative being that she was right and the school board was wrong and he hadn't supported her. He believes it, you say, that you need to be here. I think so. Yes. The needle moves. That's almost harder, isn't it? If he knew it was wrong and did it anyway, at least that's a story with an antagonist. This way, it's just a mistake. An enormous, costly, ongoing mistake that no one wants to examine too closely because examining it would require too many people to admit too many things. You think about Dr. Moreau's fraying cuffs, about his genuine surprise at Falret, about the small opening you've been working at since Wednesday. I have a consultation with Moreau on Tuesday, you say. I know. He asked me about you this morning during rounds. Wanted to know how you seem, whether I've noticed anything unusual in your behaviour. You, Look up quickly. He asks patients about each other. Sometimes he's looking for consistency, whether the person he sees during official rounds matches the person other patients see in daily life. She looks up, meets your eyes. I told him that in 9 days of close proximity, I have observed in you nothing that could not be fully explained by the perfectly reasonable distress of a woman wrongfully committed. You absorb this. That's a very specific thing to say to him. I've been here 5 months. I know how to say specific things to him. A small pause. He made a note. Tuesday comes with the particular quality of an anticipated thing that finally arrives. Less dramatic than imagined. More immediately present. You dress carefully. Hair pinned exactly right. The grey wool dress pressed as well as can be managed without an iron. The consultation room is on the ground floor at the end of the east corridor. You've never been in it before. The door is solid, old wood, with a brass handle polished to a very bright shine. Dr. Moreau opens it himself. The room is small and book-lined on 3 sides. A desk, a good one, with a green leather surface marked by the rings of many cups. 2 chairs, one behind the desk and one in front. A window looking into the side garden, not the rose garden, the vegetable garden on the east side. Orderly rows of leeks and late carrots. You sit in the chair in front of the desk. Moreau sits behind it. The casebook is open. He writes the date, the time. Madame Beaumont, he begins, and then pauses, and the pause tells you something. He's deciding how to proceed, which means he's less certain than he usually is during rounds, which means what Helene told him has registered. How long have you been here? He asks. Not what's in the notes, a real question. 16 days, you say, and your sense of the time so far. How would you characterize it? The clinical tone, but underneath it something more genuine. You decide to be direct, not reckless. Helene's warning is in your mind, the woman who moved too fast, but direct in a way that acknowledges that you're both adults in a room together. I've found it clarifying, you say. He looks up. Clarifying? It has been a very quiet 16 days. The routine here doesn't allow for the kind of activity that occupied my time before. I've been able to read and to think and to consider things I might not have examined carefully when my life was busier. A pause. I've also been afraid. I want to be honest about that. He writes something. You don't look at what he writes. What have you been afraid of? That the legal mechanisms which brought me here are more easily triggered than I understood. That the diagnostic categories being applied to me describe things that could describe almost any person in a state of emotional distress. Another pause. That the path to discharge is longer than the path to admission. A longer silence. The window shows the vegetable garden. A pigeon has landed among the leeks. Your husband's physician, Dr. Moreau says carefully, noted in his certification that you had exhibited, over a period of several months, what he described as inappropriate interest in financial matters, argumentativeness with your husband's domestic and professional decisions, and 2 incidents of what he characterized as emotional episodes. I asked to see the household accounts, you say. My husband's business had been losing money for 2 years and he'd told me nothing. I asked to see the accounts. The inappropriate interest was the interest of a woman trying to understand her own financial situation. The argumentativeness. My husband wanted to dismiss our housekeeper, who had been with my family for 11 years, on the grounds that she was too old for the work. I objected. If that's argumentativeness, the word has been stretched beyond its useful meaning. The emotional episodes, one of them was crying. I cried when he told me he intended to dismiss Madame Girard. The other was, you stop, reconstruct. I raised my voice. Once. During a conversation about whether I would be permitted to write to my mother without my husband's prior approval of the contents of the letter. A long, long silence. The pigeon in the vegetable garden pecks at something, finds it unsatisfactory, moves on. Madame Beaumont, Dr. Moreau says, and his voice has changed. Something has come out of it. The clinical angle, the professional distance, and what's left is younger, less certain. I need to tell you something about the nature of this consultation that I am required by my position here to frame in a particular way, and which I will also try to give you honestly. You wait. My role in this institution is to make medical assessments and to make treatment recommendations. Those assessments are shaped by the information I've been given about each patient prior to their arrival. In your case, that information described a woman in a state of significant nervous disorder. What you've observed instead is not that. He says it quietly but without hesitation. What I've observed over 16 days is a woman in a state of distress which is entirely comprehensible given her circumstances. There is a difference between those things, an important difference. The room is very quiet. You can't simply discharge me, you say. The certification requires 2 physicians, and requires in practice the agreement of the family responsible for the patient's commitment. He rubs the bridge of his nose. His cuffs today are unravelling slightly at the left wrist. Your husband would need to agree, or the certification would need to be successfully challenged in court, which requires a lawyer, and which requires that someone on the outside is advocating for you. A long pause. Is there someone? He asks. You think about Pierre, about the letter with the address, about 12 days ago, the ordinary careful letter going out in the morning mail. Possibly, you say. I need more time to know. He closes the casebook. He looks at you with an expression you can't entirely read. Something conflicted, something that hasn't resolved into a clear feeling yet. I'm going to make a note, he says, that in my clinical opinion, your certification should be reviewed within 30 days. That will create a formal record. It won't be enough on its own, but it's something. Something. It's more than you had an hour ago. Thank you, you say. He stands. You stand. The consultation is over. At the door, you stop. Dr. Moreau, one question. He turns. The man who came 2 months ago, from the Academy of Medicine, who was writing about private institutions. A pause. Something in his expression shifts very slightly. Jules Renaud, you say? He looks at you for a long moment. I don't know how you know that name, he says. I read, you say. Another pause. He's publishing an article, Dr. Moreau says carefully, in the Revue Médicale, about conditions in private establishments and the reliability of certification procedures. His voice is very neutral. It's intended to advocate for reform. Has he spoken to any patients? No, Dr. Vauclair didn't permit unsupervised access. You nod. Turn back toward the door. Madame Beaumont, you turn. Visiting day is Sunday. He says it as information, offered precisely, and turns back to his desk. The week between Tuesday's consultation and Sunday's visiting day has a texture that none of the weeks before it had. Not hope exactly, you're too careful for hope, but something like forward motion, something like the particular feeling of a door that has been worked at for days finally moving, the faintest give, the sense that the lock is not permanent, You maintain everything. The routine, the morning bell, the cold basin water, the bread and café au lait, the needlework that makes a flower, the afternoon walk among the roses. You maintain it all with the careful attention of someone who knows that any disruption will register, will be noted, will complicate the note Dr. Moreau has put in the casebook. You don't write any more letters. You read Falret and Esquirol and the treatise by Pinel, the oldest book on the shelf, worn soft, the spine barely holding, which forms the foundation of everything that came after. The text in which Philippe Pinel proposed in 1801 that the insane were sick people and not criminals or animals, and deserved treatment rather than chains. Pinel was right, and revolutionary, and brave. He convinced the revolutionaries of 1789 to unchain the patients at the Bicêtre, an act remembered as one of the great humanitarian gestures of the age. He was also working with the most rudimentary understanding of what insanity actually was. He and his successors built a system of classification and certification on a foundation of observation and theory and genuine good intentions and almost no empirical evidence. And that system, applied in institutions like this one, was doing precisely the wrong thing to precisely the wrong people, with full medical blessing and legal sanction. The science was wrong. The law was wrongly designed. The economics were wrong. And in the middle of all this wrongness, in rooms with white-painted iron bars, were people. Hélène with her schoolteacher's steady manner and her pebble in her pocket. Madame Beauvais with her painter's still hands. Sophie Letang, 19 years old, crying on Wednesday mornings with a regularity that breaks your heart. And you, Sunday. You wake before the bell. The room is still dark, the window a lighter grey than the room, the stars gone, but the sun not yet up. 4:30, maybe 5. The husk mattress rustles as you shift onto your back. In the room next door, Madame Arnoux hum. In the corridor, the distant footsteps of the night attendant. Outside, the first birds, a few tentative ones testing the silence. You wait for the bell. It comes at 6 as always. Twice, pause, twice. You wash, dress, hair exactly right. You eat breakfast with the particular focused calm of someone doing something important. Visiting day, the first Sunday of the month. Families come between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. The visiting room is on the ground floor, facing the road. It's the most beautiful room in the building, the one they show to prospective families, the one that speaks of comfort and care and appropriate management of delicate situations. Good furniture, clean windows, fresh flowers, actually fresh, not the slightly wilted ones in the corridors. At 2 o'clock, you take your seat. The room fills slowly, other patients who are expecting visitors. The atmosphere is strange, a peculiar combination of hope and performance, everyone presenting their best self, the version of themselves that says, I am fine, I am well, this is working. Families arrive. A husband, eyes averted slightly, sitting across from his wife with the specific discomfort of someone who has put a person somewhere and doesn't know how to look at what they've done. A mother with her daughter, both crying immediately, crying and holding hands, the attendant watching from a discreet distance. The clock on the wall reads 2:15, 2:30, 2:45. You keep your face calm. At 3:15, when you've almost decided that the letter wasn't sent or wasn't received, or that Pierre, despite his expression at Christmas, is not the person you thought he was, the door opens. Pierre! He's taller than you remember, which is wrong. People don't grow in their 20s, but he seems taller, leaner, with something in his face that you've never seen there before. It takes you a moment to identify it. Worry. Real, lived worry. Not the ordinary brotherly concern of Christmas dinners. Something that has been sitting with him for weeks. He sees you. The attendant is at the door. The visiting room rules are strict. No physical contact. Attendant present at all times. Visits of no more than 30 minutes. Pierre crosses the room, sits down across from you. He looks at your face for a long moment. Marguerite, he says. Pierre. He came from Bordeaux. 8 hours by train. He's been travelling since early this morning. Your letter, he starts. I know what it sounded like, you say quietly. The attendant is 3 meters away, ostensibly looking at the window. I wrote it carefully. It sounded perfectly normal, Pierre says. That's what worried me. You almost smile. I'm not... He lowers his voice. I'm not well placed to judge whether what's happening here is... I am well, you say, clearly. Not loudly, but clearly. I am not ill. I am not disordered. The certification was arranged by a physician who is personally acquainted with my husband. The other certifying physician was Dr. Renard, who attended my husband's business partner's family for the past 4 years. Pierre's jaw tightens slightly. I need a lawyer, you say. A good one. Someone who knows the law of alienation and the challenge procedures. There is a physician here. You glance at the attendant, who's not moved, who has noted in writing that the certification should be reviewed. That note exists. It's a starting point. Bordeaux is Paris, you say. The challenge has to be filed in Paris. There are lawyers who specialize in exactly this. I have a name. There is a journalist, Jules Renaud, at the Revue Médicale Rue des Écoles, who is writing about certification procedures in private institutions. He would have contacts. He would know which lawyers are taking these cases. Pierre is writing nothing down, but you can see him memorizing. He was always a memorizer, Pierre. Better memory than all 3 of his professors at law school combined, they used to joke. How long will this take? He asks. I don't know. Moreau's note exists. Getting it acted on, I don't know. Are you... He stops, looks at your hands, at your dress, at your face with its careful composure. Something moves in his eyes that you recognize as the look of a person cataloguing damage. Are you being treated badly? Are they... I'm not being harmed, you say. Mostly true. The things that are happening to you are not the things that happen to the difficult patients, to Madame Arnoux, to Sophie on her worst Wednesdays. But I need to not be here. I need to not be here for months longer, he looks at you. I came as soon as I got your letter, he says. I took a week's leave from the firm. I've been in Paris since Thursday, trying to find out where you were. Your husband told our mother you were at a convalescent house in Normandy. He lied. Yes. Pierre's voice is very controlled. He lied to our mother, who is currently worried about your health, and who has been told that visitors would be upsetting to your recovery. She doesn't know I'm here. She knows now. I went to Lyon on my way to Paris. He pauses. She's furious. Your mother, furious, is a considerable force. You feel something in your chest release very slightly. She can't do anything directly, Pierre says, but she's writing to her lawyer in Lyon. She's also writing to your husband's business partners. She knows things about the firm's finances that she would prefer not to have to use. You think about your mother in her house in Lyon, writing letters with precise fury. You think about the household accounts you'd asked to see. The declining balance sheets, the 2 years of losses your husband had concealed. Your mother knew. Of course she knew. She'd been watching. The first thing, you say, is the lawyer. The challenge to the certification. Moreau's note. I understand. Pierre stands. The attendant is moving slightly, and looks at you with the particular expression of a younger brother who has finally understood something he should have understood earlier, and is in the process of deciding what to do about that. I'm going to get you out of here, he says, quietly, completely certain. The attendant steps forward. Time, sir. Pierre holds your eyes for one moment longer. Pierre, you say. Renaud. Jules Renaud. Rue des Écoles. I heard you, he says, and then he's gone. The door closes. You sit for another minute in the visiting room, with its good furniture and its fresh flowers, while around you other reunions end and other families file out with their complicated mixtures of guilt and relief and love and distance. Sophie Letang is in the corner, alone. No one came for her. Her hands are in her lap. You stand, walk to her table, sit down across from her. She looks up. Her eyes are dry today, which is Sunday, not Wednesday. No one came, she says. Not a question. Not today. She nods. My mother was the one who arranged this, she says. So she won't come. My father died when I was 8. My mother and I. She stops, starts again. I was engaged. To a man she'd chosen. I didn't want to marry him. I said so. She called a physician. 19 years old. Do you have anyone else, you ask? Anyone who might... My aunt in Strasbourg. She thinks for a moment. She doesn't know I'm here. She probably thinks I'm... I don't know what she thinks. Do you know her address? Sophie looks at you. Something in her face that hasn't been there before. A kind of careful attention. The attention of someone who has stopped expecting anything and has been surprised. You found a way, she says. Not a question. I found something, you say carefully. I don't know yet if it works, but I'll tell you what I know. The following week. The week has a different weight than the ones before it. Not lighter, you know better than that, but different. Something is moving now in the world outside these walls that wasn't moving before. Pierre is in Paris. Your mother is writing letters. Dr. Moreau's note is in a casebook in the consultation room at the end of the east corridor. Tuesday comes, Wednesday, Thursday. The routine continues because the routine doesn't know what you know. The bell rings. The bread is slightly stale. The soup is thin. The weaving makes ribbon by the inch. But something has shifted. You notice it first in yourself. A quality of attention that was tightening with each day of the first weeks. A contraction of something essential and which has now slightly loosened. Not hope exactly. Something more practical. Agency. The sense that you're not merely waiting but working. You notice it second in Hélène. On Thursday in the weaving room, her shuttle moving with its usual precision, she tells you without looking up that Dr. Moreau spoke to her again this morning. He asked me, she says, whether, in my observation, the patients in this section were being treated appropriately, and whether there were any practices I'd observed that I felt were clinically questionable. You let the shuttle pass through. Once. Twice. What did you say? I told him about the water room, about the temperatures and the duration and the fact that it's used primarily as a behavioural management tool rather than as a specific therapeutic intervention for a specific diagnostic presentation. A pause. I told him about Madame Arnoux, and he made notes, longer ones than usual. Hélène's shuttle moves. The ribbon grows. He asked if I would be willing to write down what I'd observed formally as part of a clinical review. You look at her. He's building something, you say. I think so. Whether it's for the sake of his patients or the sake of his own conscience or both, I don't know. But he's moving, she pauses. The article, Renault's article, I think Moreau knows about it, and I think he's deciding which side of it he wants to be on. Young physician, fraying cuffs, working his way through a career, trained on Falret's idealism, and confronted every day with the reality of what that idealism becomes in an institution structured around economic interests. He's been doing this job for how long? A year? 2? Long enough to understand the system, but maybe not long enough to have stopped seeing it. What made him different from the others, you ask? Not you personally. The question is broader. Helene thinks for a moment. I think he went into medicine because he believed something. The shuttle moves. Some people in institutions like this went into medicine to have a respectable profession and a reliable income. Some of them went in because they believed the theory, the moral therapy, the reform, the genuinely better treatment of people. Moreau is one of the second type, and it's harder to keep believing the theory when the practice is this. She nods her head very slightly toward the door, toward the building, toward the whole system of which this weaving room is a part. Dissonance, you say. If you read enough Falret, you start noticing where reality diverges from the model. On the second Sunday of the month, the visiting day comes, and you sit in the visiting room at 2 o'clock, and at 2:20 Pierre arrives with someone you've never met. The someone is a woman of about 40, small and precise-looking, in a good dark coat, carrying a leather briefcase of the kind that lawyers carry. My sister, Marguerite Beaumont, Pierre says. The woman looks at you with the evaluating attention of someone whose professional training involves rapid assessment of credibility. Maître Joséphine Blanc, she says, I'm a solicitor. I've been retained by your brother. A pause. And by Jules Renault, who asked to be remembered to you and who will be visiting next week with the inspector from the prefectural office. The inspector, the attendant is 3 meters away. You look at Maître Blanc with the most composed expression you have ever assembled in your life. How does the challenge proceed, you ask? Your husband's certification relied on 2 physicians, she says. We have obtained, through research, the record of Dr. Renard's prior professional relationship with your husband's associate, which constitutes a conflict of interest in validating his certification under the 1838 statutes. We have Dr. Moreau's formal note questioning the clinical validity of the original assessment. We have testimony, a brief pause, from a source within this institution confirming that the hydrotherapy procedures employed here have been used for behavioral management in ways inconsistent with accepted medical practice. She says it all very quickly and very quietly and very precisely, the way you say important things in rooms where you're being watched. Moreau, you say, yes. Your heart is moving at a speed that you are, once again, working very hard not to let appear on your face. Timeline, you say. The challenge can be filed within the week. The hearing will be scheduled within 20 days. You will need to appear before a panel of 3 physicians, independent of this institution, who will conduct their own examination. She pauses. Given the documentation we have, my professional opinion is that you will be discharged. Pierre is watching you from across the table. His expression has something in it now that resolves, as you look at it, into the specific relief of someone who has been carrying a weight and has just set it down. Sophie Letang, you say, 19 years old, East Wing committed for refusing an arranged marriage. Maître Blanc writes something in her briefcase. Hélène Marchand, you say. Schoolteacher from Rouen, 5 months. Certified for arguing with a school board. She writes. Madame Beauvais, 6 years. Her husband found her paintings disturbing. A longer pause. I'll need formal statements, Maître Blanc says. I know, you say. Give me the week. The week. It is the strangest week of your life. You are, technically, a patient in a private asylum. Technically, you are under the care of Dr. Vauclair and performing your daily routine of bread and soup and weaving and walking. Technically, nothing has changed. Actually, everything is different. You know now what is coming. Dr. Moreau knows. Hélène knows. You've told Sophie carefully in 5-minute increments over 3 needlework sessions, and she has held the information with a steadiness that suggests she's stronger than her Wednesday mornings indicate. You have not told Madame Beauvais because Madame Beauvais is 6 years. 6 years of the same dissolution that you saw beginning in other women over your weeks here. You don't know what Madame Beauvais can hold, and you don't want to give her hope and then watch it complicate what she's built. But Maître Blanc knows about Madame Beauvais, and Jules Renaud is coming. On Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, during the period when patients are in the reading room or the garden, a man in a good coat arrives at the gate with a letter from the Ministry of the Interior and a letter from the prefectural inspector's office. The letters are official. The letters cannot be refused. You don't see this happen. You're in the reading room, sitting with your falret, watching the attendant's needles click. But you hear, half an hour later, these sounds from Dr. Vauclair's office. The tone of voices, not the words. The specific register of a conversation going badly for someone. At 11:30, Dr. Moreau opens the reading room door. Madame Beaumont, he says. Madame Marchand, he pauses. Sophie Letang. The attendant looks up. I need these 3 patients for a clinical assessment, Moreau says. The attendant makes a note. The room they use is the consultation room at the end of the east corridor. Jules Renaud is 30, approximately, with ink-stained fingers and the specific energy of someone who has been working towards something for a long time and is finally very close to it. The prefectural inspector is 50, grey-haired, official in posture, sitting with his hands flat on the table in front of him. Moreau introduces the inspector, the journalist. The inspector is here, Moreau says carefully, in his official capacity to conduct a review of certification procedures at this institution. Monsieur Renaud is here in a journalistic capacity, observing the review. This is consistent with the prefectural office's new transparency protocols. The inspector nods. Vauclair is not in this room. You don't know where Vauclair is. Madame Beaumont, the inspector says, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them as precisely and completely as you can. Nothing you say here will be held against you. He says it like someone who has said it before and isn't entirely certain it's true. You answer his questions. You answer for 45 minutes. You are precise. You are specific. You name dates. You describe the certification process. You describe Dr. Renard and the timeline of his relationship with your husband's business partner. You describe the letter that was never sent. You describe the cold bath your neighbour was taken to at midnight. You don't lose your composure once. When you finish, the inspector has filled 3 pages of notes. Renaud has written more. The inspector looks at Moreau. Your note about the certification review, he says. Filed 6 days ago, Moreau says. I can retrieve it now. Please. Moreau leaves the room, comes back with a casebook, opens it. The note is there in his careful handwriting. 3 paragraphs, detailed, clinical, covering every element of your case with the precision of a man who knew what he was building when he wrote it. The inspector reads it, nods, closes his notebook. I'm going to need to conduct this same interview with Madame Marchand and with Mademoiselle Letang, he says, and I will need access to all patient records for the past 5 years. He looks at Renaud. I think, he says, that Monsieur Renaud will find what he came to find. You're not discharged that day. This is the part that nobody tells you about. The papers, the hearings, the formal processes that are actually somewhat slower than you'd hoped. The challenge is filed by Maître Blanc. The hearing is scheduled. The independent panel of physicians is convened. You are in the maison for another 3 weeks after Renaud's visit. 3 weeks in which the institution continues to function. The bell rings, the bread is stale, the soup is thin, the roses go past their best into the cold beauty of late autumn. 3 weeks in which Dr. Vauclair is very quiet, very controlled, moving through the building with the careful deliberateness of a man who has seen the shape of what is coming and has not yet decided how to respond to it. 3 weeks in which Dr. Moreau does his rounds every morning and writes in his casebook, and looks at each patient with an attention that is now genuinely clinical rather than institutional. The difference you've come to understand between a physician looking for evidence of what he's been told to find and one trying to see what's actually there. 3 weeks in which you walk the garden every afternoon and watch the leaves change and think about what comes next, which is a luxury that took weeks to recover, the ability to think forward rather than only inward. Helene teaches you chess. She's very good at chess, which surprises you briefly and then doesn't, because of course she is. Sophie stops crying on Wednesdays. Madame Beauvais, on a Thursday afternoon in the 2nd week, approaches you in the garden and says very quietly that she understands something is happening, that she would like to know what it is. You tell her. She listens with those very still hands in her lap, and when you finish she says nothing for a moment. Then, my paintings are in storage in Versailles. My husband told me they were destroyed. A pause. They weren't, she says. It's not a question. Something in her voice that has been dormant for 6 years has just woken up. I don't know what happened to them, you say honestly. If I can get out of here, she says, with the specificity and a calm that is more frightening than rage, I will find them. The hearing is a Tuesday morning in November. You travel to Paris with Maître Blanc and Pierre in a hired carriage. This is the first time you've been outside the walls of the Maison Vauclair in 46 days. The road is ordinary, trees, fields, other carriages, small villages, things you've seen 1,000 times and which are, this morning, miraculous in their ordinariness. A dog running in a field, a woman hanging laundry in a garden, a man cycling on the road's edge going the other direction, not looking at you. Paris arrives gradually. First the smell, then the sound, then the density of buildings, the narrowing of sky between rooftops, and then the city in full, flooding the carriage windows with motion and noise and the 10,000 small facts of daily life. You press your hand against the window glass. Cold, slightly damp from the morning fog, real. The panel consists of 3 physicians who have read the documentation. They conduct their examination over 4 hours. They ask similar questions to the inspector's questions. They ask them differently, more clinical in language, more precise in their diagnostic focus, but the substance is the same. Who committed you? Under what circumstances? What you believe your condition to be, you answer. At 12:30, the panel withdraws to deliberate. At 1:45, they return. The senior panelist reads from a document. Words like certification invalid and insufficient clinical basis, and recommend immediate discharge. Legal language, formal, bloodless, carrying more weight per syllable than any words you've heard in 46 days. And then it's done. There is paperwork even after the words are read. There is always paperwork. You sign things. Maître Blanc reviews things. Pierre stands beside you with the specific stillness of someone who's been tightly wound for weeks and is very slowly unwinding. The room empties gradually. The physicians leave. The inspector leaves. Renaud is there in the corner making notes. He crosses the room to you. "I owe you something," he says. He means the card he left on the shelf. "You owe me nothing," you say, "but I'd like to read your article when it publishes." It publishes in January. He hesitates. There are women still there. Madame Marchand. Her challenge is filed. Maître Blanc is handling it. And 3 others. You pause. There are more women in that building who shouldn't be there. Your article. "We'll make the argument for systematic reform," he says. "The inspector's report will be filed with the ministry. These things are slow." "I know they're slow." He looks at you. "You should." He starts and then stops and seems to reconsider. "You should write something about your specific experience, not legal language, something that makes people understand what it's like," you say. "Yes." You think about 9 days of lying on a husk mattress, about the cold painted iron bars under your fingers, about Madame Beauvai's still hands and 6 years and paintings in storage in Versailles, about Sophie Letung's eyes in the visiting room when you said, "I'll tell you what I know." "I'll think about it," you say. Outside the building, on the steps, in the cold November air of Paris, Pierre puts his coat around your shoulders and you stand for a moment breathing it in. Coal smoke, bakery, horse, the river, 1,000 lives happening at once within smelling distance. Not clean, not beautiful in any simple sense, but yours. "Where do you want to go?" Pierre says. It's the strangest question, the broadest question. You have forgotten, briefly, what it means to have an answer to it that isn't constrained by schedules and bells and attendants at the door. "Somewhere with a window," you say, "and coffee. Real coffee." He laughs. A real laugh. The first one in a long time. You walk. The article by Jules Renaud publishes in La Revue Médicale de France on January 8th, 1864. Its title is The Question of Certification, Private Institutions and the Rights of the Committed. Its subtitle is A Clinical Investigation. It runs to 42 pages. It cites the inspector's report. It cites Dr. Moreau's casebook notes. It does not name specific patients, but the cases described are specific enough that anyone with knowledge of the institution would recognize them. The Maison Vauclair is not named, but a private institution 11 kilometers outside Paris on the road to Versailles is specific enough that it is immediately identified. Dr. Vauclair responds with a statement defending his practices. Several prominent physicians respond to the statement. The ministry requests a full review. Dr. Moreau resigns his position at the Maison Vauclair in February and takes a position at the Salpêtrière, where he subsequently publishes his own work on certification standards and patient rights, work that is cited for the next 20 years in the ongoing argument about what the law should say. His cuffs, by all accounts, remain perpetually fraying. Some things don't change. Hélène Marchand is discharged in December. She returns to Rouen. She does not return to her husband's house. She takes a room with a widow of her acquaintance and returns to teaching. She and you write letters, real ones, uncensored, for the rest of your lives. Sophie Letang is discharged in January, 2 weeks after the article publishes. Her mother, confronted with the documentation, is advised by her lawyer not to oppose the challenge. Sophie goes to Strasbourg, to her aunt, Madame Beauvais. Madame Beauvais's case is the difficult one, the slow one, the one that takes until March of 1864. 6 years of certification, 6 years of records, a husband who is not a bad man exactly, but who is a man who has organised his life around her absence and is very resistant to reorganising it. But Maître Blanc is persistent. The paintings are in storage in Versailles. They're not destroyed. A neighbour of the storage facility, interviewed by Renaud for a follow-up piece, describes them as remarkable, strange possibly, unusual, disturbing perhaps to someone who finds disturbing things remarkable in a negative rather than a positive sense. The paintings are returned to Madame Beauvais in April 1864. You don't know what she does with them. You lose track of her after that, and looking back, you think that's exactly right. She went somewhere you couldn't follow, back to a life that was hers, back to whatever painting means to someone who has waited 6 years to be able to do it again. As for you, you filed for legal separation from your husband in February 1864, under the new provisions that the ongoing legal reform has begun to make available to women in your situation. It's a slow process. Everything is slow. The law is not redesigned in a single season. But it moves. Things move. You write the thing Jules Renaud suggested. Not for a medical journal, for a general publication. A first-person account, careful, specific, containing dates and details and the particular sensory texture of what it is to live for 46 days in a room with white painted iron bars and a husk mattress and the smell of camphor. The piece publishes in May 1864. The response surprises you. Letters from women in similar situations, letters from their families, letters from physicians who were troubled by what they read, one letter from Dr. Vauclair that you don't open, letters from other women in other rooms. The room you're writing from now has no bars on the windows. The coffee is real. The morning is ordinary and beautiful in the way of things that are yours. And now it's late. You've been with this story for a long time, and so have I, and both of us should probably rest. The Maison still stands, not as an asylum. It became something else, eventually. A school, I think, then apartments. The copper bathtub was removed sometime in the 1890s when the building changed hands, removed and presumably sold for scrap, ending its therapeutic career in someone's furnace. The roses are gone too, or different roses now, the same garden with a different century's plants. But the room where she lay on the husk mattress, looking at the water stain shaped like France, that room still exists in whatever form. The walls still remember. The stone retains things. And in Paris, 11 kilometres away, the world continued while she was gone from it. And when she returned, it was still there. Same cafes, same streets, same coal smoke and coffee and the river. That's the thing about the world. It's still there. Let that go. Let the story settle. Let the 46 days dissolve into the distance that's given to all things eventually. You've been very still for a while now, I can tell. Your body knows what your mind is still deciding. Your body is already moving toward the dark, already letting the edges go soft. The cold of the story, the camphor, the iron bars, the water room and the husk mattress, all of it is receding. You're warm where you are, warm and still and far from any locked door. The sounds around you, whatever sounds you have, whatever ordinary sounds of your particular ordinary life, are just sounds, not urgent, not requiring anything from you, not recording you in any casebook. Just sounds, and then just quiet, and then just you, breathing. There was a garden, there were roses, there was a woman who looked at a sky that went up forever and breathed cold air and thought, I am still thinking, still here, still working on the problem. She was, you are, that's enough. Outside, somewhere, whatever season it is where you are, the world is doing its work without you and will continue to do so. And here, where you are, there is just the dark. Warm, quiet, safe. Your hands can be still now. Your mind doesn't have to solve anything tonight. Tomorrow will come with its particular requirements. Tomorrow there will be coffee and light and the small negotiations of ordinary life. But that's tomorrow. That's a problem for the morning. Right now there's just this. The dark, the quiet, the room that's yours, the breath coming in and going out, slow and slower and softer. And the last sound you hear is something very far away. A bell, maybe, in some old city, counting an hour too late to count, and then nothing. Just the good dark. Just sleep. Good night.